everyone. And today I'm excited to get into a topic that I'm quite passionate about myself. I'll be speaking with Kelly about the whole MACH architecture, the MACH Alliance, and what a move to a MACH-first approach really means. But maybe before we get started, Kelly, why don't you start us off with a bit of an introduction to who you are, and maybe just a quick thought on how the MACH Alliance came about.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I am CPO of commercetools, where I do lots of different things. I lead product strategy, I lead product management, integrations, some corporate development. I do a little bit of everything in commercetools, it seems. And before that, I was with Oracle, where I was a product manager for microservice and some other cloud services. And before that, I was with eCommerce pioneer ATG. I've written 4 O'Reilly books on the intersection of commerce and tech. And also, as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder and past president of the MACH Alliance, which is a consortium of now 53 member companies, including commercetools and GraphCMS.
Right.
So thank you for your support. But we've also had recently AWS sign on, Sapient, MongoDB, Netlify, Vercel, lots of good tech-focused, products-based organizations have joined our movement. And the MACH Alliance came about it's actually 2019, give or take.
In
2018, yeah, in 2018, we at commercetools came up with the term MACH. And we actually used it in a marketing campaign, and it really crystallized the form of architecture that we do. It's microservices, API first, cloud native, multi-tenant, and headless, MACH. And then in 2019, we started to see the term really get used out there by our partners, by developers, and it got to the point at commercetools where we had a developer apply to join us, who had claimed on his CV that he was a MACH certified developer. And we thought, all right, this is interesting. This is clearly a term that's picking up. And I'm old enough to have been around to see when cloud became a thing, and then big data, and then machine learning, and then AI, and all these things. And what happened with all those terms is every legacy vendor slapped those terms over whatever old crap product they had. And the terms ceased to mean anything at all. And when you have a vendor having software from 1992 and it's hosted clearly, and it's some nasty old COBOL, and all of a sudden they now claim it's cloud-based, the term cloud doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. And I didn't want the same thing to happen to MACH. So we got together with 4 other partners, and we each threw in some money and formed a 501c6, which in the US is actually technically a business league. So it's a group of in some cases, direct competitors coming together to advance a cause or advance a mission. And where I live in Wisconsin, for example, we have the Dairy Producers Association, and it's dairy farms. They come together and they run advertisements talking about the benefits of milk, for example, or the fact that almond milk isn't real milk, or whatever. Right? They're advocating for their interests, and they have a 501c6 as well, just as we do. So we come together and we first are very open about gatekeeping. We want to make it crystal clear who is actually MACH-based and who is not. And then we're able to enforce a trademark on vendors that are not MACH-based. And we can actually stop them from using the term. So first is just to prevent the term from being watered down. Mm-hmm. The second and biggest part of our mission is educating the market. It's expanding the category. It's creating and expanding the category for MACH-based products, because the definition of the standard product forever was more of a hosted monolithic application, and our approach with MACH is fundamentally different. And we as vendors are coming together, and in a non-commercial way, and that's a key point. It's explicitly non-commercial. We are educating folks from developers all the way through CFOs and CEOs on what MACH is, what its benefits are. For the CFOs of the world, we have webinars on the accounting side of SaaS software, for example. For developers, we do hackathons. We have in-person events. We're hosting a conference this year. So a lot of it's education, and we have a full-time staff of 4. We are hiring a managing director, and we have an operating budget of just about $2 million. And then the third and final function of the alliance is networking. So we have an ambassador program where typically VPs or C-level execs from companies going through digital transformations using Mach, they can come together. So we have senior executives from Sephora and Ulta Beauty and Puma and Lego, lots of folks like that come together and talk about the advantages of Mach software and what it is and why it's important and everything else. And then also it's an opportunity for vendors to come together and make it easier for folks to buy our respective solutions. So we align on contractual terms, for example, to make the contracting process easier. Things around how you charge for the software, it's important consideration, and it's important that those things be relatively aligned across vendors. So those are kind of the three primary functions.
Yeah, I think those, and I can attest to the fact that you mentioned that there were direct competitors for commercetools who were involved in the foundation of the alliance, and it's the same in our case. There are some of our direct competitors, but it never feels like, let's say, a little bit of a battle to generate leads. It really is about everyone coming together to advocate this sort of best of breed approach. And I want to take 2 points that you brought up when you were introducing the alliance, to just sort of latch on to that. Coming from Oracle and then into commercetools and setting up the MACH Alliance. So without focusing on the alliance itself, let's look at just the MACH architecture as a concept. What is sort of the current state of enterprise architectures that you're seeing, and how does MACH sort of come in contrast?
Well, the standard previously, although this is very, very rapidly changing, but the previous standard was take a platform that was built in the 90s or early 2000s, and these platforms tend to be monolithic. They have the head very tightly bolted on. It's definitively not SaaS. It has to be hosted somewhere, not microservice based, just very legacy products. And there's this marketing veneer of now all of a sudden it's cloud, which we all know not to be the case. But that's the veneer, that's the impression that gets created, is we may wave a magic wand and now all of a sudden a product from 1997 is now magically cloud, but it's not. And unfortunately for us, the vendors offering these products are big household names, which I won't name, but there are a lot of big household name software vendors offering these arguably very subpar old products. And it's challenging because as an alliance, we're made up of relatively small companies. I know we have AWS and MongoDB and some others, but I think the lion's share of the alliance is companies that are 100 to 500 employees. And independently, none of us have enough voice in the market to sway the market, right, and to have a voice to counter a 200,000 person company. But by coming together, we really can. And that's the whole point of the alliance, is let's come together in a non-commercial way. And I like that you said it's not about leads. It's not. We don't do leads through the alliance. That's not why you joined. That's not why we founded this thing. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to create interest in Mach and make sure that folks see it as what it is, which is a very safe and alternative to the prevailing standard out there.
And you also mentioned a really interesting point there, where the majority of the members in the alliance are sort of at the 100 to 500 team mark. And I think for us, it's a bit different, given that we're digital first and we're sort of technology companies. It's easy for us to see the benefits of what a Mach or an API first architecture could be. But when speaking with enterprises, what are some of the differences and considerations you're seeing in contrast to sort of mid-market companies when it comes to their interest in moving to a Mach architecture?
Well, many of the mid-size companies out there, and by mid-size, I would say somebody who's doing between, let's call it 25 million a year online to maybe 200, 250 million a year online, somewhere in that neighborhood. They basically want a website in a box, right? They want a product that does a little bit of everything. They want it to have an OMS, a CMS, search, commerce, basically a forklifted everything in a single box together. And I think, to some degree that makes sense. I get it at that end of the market. The difference, though, is now larger organizations, folks doing more than 250, are not buying those types of products anymore. Right? That was the prevailing standard for decades. Since the mid 90s, that's how you bought commerce. You bought everything in a box from a big vendor. And now with MACH, what we have are companies like ours, companies like yours. We have lots of other good member companies out there. And what's unique about our respective companies is we do one thing or one focus area, and we do it really, really, really well. So we at commercetools are very laser focused on commerce and commerce adjacent things. You guys, of course, are very focused on CMS. We have Algolia and Constructor and others for search. So what you're doing is instead of going to one vendor and just getting everything in a box, you're now going to best of breed vendors, and you're assembling a catalog, a portfolio of individually consumable APIs that you can then consume from your front end. So that's the H there, it's headless.
Right. And looking at that adoption, right? So obviously at a different scale or even at a different vertical, companies would come in with different challenges and sort of different goals for what they want to achieve from a new architecture. So I'd be curious, not only on the wins, but also some of the concerns that you've seen pop up from companies who've sort of made that transition into a MACH architecture.
Companies have to get better about procurement. In many cases, it could take a year to get through procurement for whatever the tech and business teams agree with. And I think that's crazy. And in a best of breed architecture where you're dealing with 3, 4, 5 different vendors, that can't be the case. And especially, look, I understand if you were doing business with SAP and you had a $50 million deal for an ERP, I get it, right? That makes sense. You want to make sure you have a 2-year-long selection process. You're going to be living with that for a very long time. But the difference with MACH vendors is, for better or worse, we are disposable. And I'm the very first person to say, if commercetools isn't meeting your needs, throw it out and get somebody else. That's fine. And us as vendors, we're all very focused on doing one thing. An average contract for one of us might be $50,000 to $200,000 a year. So basically the cost of a developer, somewhere in that neighborhood. For a big enterprise, that's not that much money. And the amount of time that they spend in going through procurement and everything else is pretty ridiculous, I think. Sure. And companies have to get better about procurement. The other thing you have to start seeing is that, sure, there are platforms out there that sell at the enterprise level that have a little bit of everything, but I would much rather that somebody go buy the absolute best CMS from you or some other MACH Alliance member, because that's all you do as a company, right? You're the best CMS in the world. And other members of the Alliance have fantastic offerings. Buy one of the MACH Alliance member CMSs, because they're backed by companies that do that one thing and do it really, really, really well. And I'd hate to see somebody go out and buy a commerce platform and then get the cheap, dinky CMS that's bolted on and was built by a 5-person team over the course of 6 months. You're inherently going to get a very subpar solution. Same with OMS, same with search. And it's the lazy way out. You can certainly tick the box and now say you have an OMS. But in today's very competitive world, many of us are in winner take all or winner take most markets. You have to use best of breed software to compete effectively. And it's a lot easier to integrate software than it ever used to be. And if you can make the difficulty of buying the software easier, it's pretty easy to assemble a catalog. And then if certain vendors aren't meeting your needs or your needs change, then swap them out and replace them. They shouldn't have to be 50-year commitments. They should be 2, 3, 4-year commitments. That's what you should be looking at these days.
Well, I would rather they keep recurring for 50 years because they're happy with the product rather than just being locked in for the entire period.
Yeah.
But I think, again, like when you talk about having a better education around how procurement works, and just going back to a point that you've clarified a bit on earlier, but I'd love to know why. So if we look at this movement, you've got the MACH architecture on one hand, and then you've got the MACH Alliance itself on the other. So while I understand you wouldn't want the term to be sort of washed by vendors who aren't completing the criteria. Why would you feel that there's a need for an alliance to be sort of certifying vendors and ISVs and SIs rather than just having more thought leadership or resources on the topic to make it purely educational?
Well, I was called, and I don't do this often, but on occasion I talk to customers or prospects, and I was sitting down with the CMO of a very large luxury company. They sell diamonds, very famous company known for selling diamonds, which I won't name. And she said to me, commercetools is saying that you're mock based. She also said to me, Salesforce said the exact same thing. She said, I don't know who to believe. Right? And that's the challenge out there is you have folks who are not in this market, people who've never heard that term before. And there was literally a Salesforce sales guy in right before me who also made the exact same claims that I would later then make. And she's left scratching her head, not knowing who to believe. So certification means that we as an alliance, we as an industry can certify who is in, who is not. And even Joe Sisman from Forrester, he wrote a great blog post in which he said, we're zealous gatekeepers. And I think that's a great term. We are gatekeepers. That's what I want to do. And I wish others had done that with things like cloud native or things like cloud or, some of these other terms that we now see splashed over every single product, regardless of how much AI there actually is in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was, what was Joe's phrase there? It was like, the Mac Alliance are like the bouncers behind the rope for the coolest tech club in town. And it was funny at first, of course, but I completely see the point on why this gatekeeping is needed. And well, that's also interesting, right? Because if you think about the exact opposite of this situation, without naming any names, whether it's ISVs or other software companies, how would you counter the argument that Mach or the terminology or the alliance is just sort of a marketing hype to push a certain agenda when the market is headed in that direction anyways?
We are pushing an agenda. It's Mach.
It is.
I will gladly own that. We are in the business of making sure that folks who are claiming Mach technology are actually Mach based, and we're educating the market, and we're creating community. So those are three things that I will gladly say that we are actively doing. And I would say, look at the thought leadership we've done. It is not specific to any vendor. We never name specific vendors, and actually by IRS law, by tax law, we cannot name a specific vendor. So speaking on behalf of the Alliance, I cannot and would not say, go buy commercetools because it's a Mach Alliance member. Instead, I can say, go buy a Mach-based or Mach Alliance certified commerce platform, of which, commercetools and are all valid options. And that's fine, because we're not in the business of trying to win opportunities through the Alliance. The whole purpose of the Alliance is to create interest and demand and educate folks on what it is and why it's better. So by coming together, we're very deliberately suspending our competitiveness and coming together as an industry to grow the pie, basically, is what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the members that have signed up, the big names out there, you look at the events that we're doing, you look at the sheer number of applications we get for ambassadorships and for ISV and SI members, and many of those we reject. You look at the press coverage we've been getting, the organic press coverage. I think it's pretty safe to say it's not just a marketing thing.
True, it's definitely gone beyond that, and this is what I find really interesting, because for companies like us, right, when we look at GraphCMS or commercetools, it's I would say quite prevalent to see e-commerce making a huge chunk of at least the first round of market adoption. We see a lot of this conversation coming up from e-commerce companies, but the entire software landscape is obviously much larger, and Mach architectures are really applicable to a wider range of use cases. So how would you see sort of MACH certified principles applied in a more agnostic approach, across different use cases and verticals that aren't opinionated to e-commerce?
Well, our charter is anything related to customer engagement or customer experience, of which e-commerce is the sector that's been invested in most heavily and is most likely to use more modern technology. So there are other verticals out there, things like financial services. They're pretty far behind. Healthcare, it's pretty far behind. A lot of more B2B focused technology that's behind. Order management. But what I'm starting to see is more and more of those things coming forward. So there's been a lot of interest from OMS vendors recently in the alliance, which is great to see. And then we've brought on some ambassadors from financial services and healthcare. So we are actively reaching out, but every industry has its own timeline. And in the commerce space, it evolves quickly because it's the thing that's generating, quite literally billions of dollars in revenue for a lot of these brands. There are many brands out there that only transact digitally. That's it. So when you're replacing your commerce platform, you're replacing the very thing that you use to make money and that you use to feed your kids.
Yeah, it really is the core of your
So
architecture.
there's a very clear return on investment there. It is. There's clear return on investment there. But things like life sciences and healthcare, they're just starting their digitization, and as a result, we see a lot more greenfield deployments there. They're looking for brand new stacks, and then a MACH-based architecture is really what we start to see become the default, which is good. So we're working on it. But I think that's kind of why you've seen commerce a little bit more tip of the spear there.
I also think it's because in e-commerce, the end user is a lot less forgiving for any compromise on performance or user experience. No, but I think we've definitely covered a lot of ground there, and it's a lot of great points to unpack. But maybe without getting into too much of the details with e-commerce, maybe just to end on a bit of a lighter note, I'd love to know what your parting thoughts are, right? Between when you started help shape the alliance and now, how has your views on MACH and the evolution towards MACH evolved, and sort of what would you like to see the future of the MACH alliance look like?
I'm actually quite surprised it took off as fast as it did. When we started the alliance, there were 5 of us total, and then we launched with 13. Now we're at 53, and we're growing pretty rapidly. So I think that's really positive, and I think the alliance took off and grew as fast as it did because I think it was the right body at the right time. This MACH architecture makes perfect sense now, and if you were building something from scratch, that's of course the architecture you would use. At the same time, the legacies out there that have been dominant, in many cases, they've been on the decline, and the limitations of that old school architecture are catching up with them. People get sick of throwing $2, $3, $4 million a year at upgrades, right? And with MACH-based products, there's really no concept of an upgrade because we're updating our software all the time. In the same way that when you log into to Gmail or to Slack, it just magically gets better, and that's great. That's what you want to see. So, and then also I'd like to believe a little bit, through the alliance, we're making it the safe choice. We're making this an option, and that's only possible by coming together, because as individual companies, we're all too small to make the market notice us. But by coming together and not acting in a commercial way and being really clear about our mission, which is certification, it's about education, it's about community, those 3 things, none of that involves a commercial sale, and people don't like to be sold to, and we don't want to sell them. That's not our responsibility. So I think just the structure of the alliance and our mission has made us a trusted source because we're an industry body promoting an industry. We're not promoting commercial products.
And that's great to see. Cool. Well, I think that's been, we've packed in quite a few points there. So thank you so much for sharing and for, taking the time to have this conversation. What I'll do is I'll just pull up your socials on the screen now. So if anyone would like to reach out to you or learn more about the MACH Alliance and commercetools, of course, I encourage them to do so. Thanks again for the time. It's been great catching up, and looking forward to speaking soon again.
All right. Thanks for having me.